Our comforting conviction that the world makes sense rests on a secure foundation, our almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance. And with that, I would like to welcome back to the switch for the, I don't know how many times, my friend Shrikant Rangnekar. Shrikant, welcome back.
Thank you, Chase.
So today you've come back on the switch to tell us about a switch that you have recently had, an expansion on an idea. Can you give us the 10,000 foot overview? What is it that you're bringing to the conversation today?
Sure. I would love to do that. Chase, could you put up the graphic for the people who are
Yeah, you got it.
who are watching this? Okay. I've been trying to make sense of the human condition for a long time. I think we can go for a smaller version of it. I think some of it is not showing up. The graphic. Okay, perfect.
Good.
Yeah, perfect. So I've been trying to make sense of human condition, and human beings are so complex. And I have struggled. I've looked at many different systems. I'm a big fan of Carl Jung and his psychological functions. I've looked at, many kind of sociological ways of looking at human beings, all kinds. And over the last 4 years, we've been doing meetups on psychology and philosophy and self-improvement. So we've been coming at the human condition from many, many different directions on many, many different topics. And we're doing this in New York, so people show up with all kinds of views. What I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to say, okay, can there be like a simple terminology, like a simple vocabulary that we can put together, kind of the essential axes along which different human problems or interactions take place, conflicts are arranged along, and keep it very, very simple so we can at least talk about the entire range of human condition. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I don't know how good it is. It's a way of trying to classify questions, provide a framework for classifying questions so we can talk about the human condition. So that's what I'm trying to do.
And so in doing that, you've brought in some ideas from other thinkers. You mentioned Carl Jung. I know when you first mentioned this idea to me, the first thing you said was thinking fast and slow, Daniel Kahneman. That's the reason that I brought in that Daniel Kahneman quote that I like. Can you talk about what are the axes? What are the basic terms that you're trying to bring as the core of the conversation?
Absolutely. Can you do me a favor, Chase? There is an updated diagram on the meetup page. Can you get that one? That is a much more simpler one than this one.
Yeah.
I think that will help us a lot. Okay, so let me start by first, in terms of thinkers, it was initially kind of inspired by Daniel Kahneman. Okay, before I came to Daniel Kahneman, for me, Carl Jung's work on psychological functions was the cat's whiskers. He has a very elaborate system, very powerful system of, feeling and thinking and sensing and intuition. And each of those functions pointed kind of inward and outward. Which makes up a total of 8 functions. And I found it extremely useful to kind of think about what I was doing, what other people were doing, how the interactions were working based on that. Then I came across Daniel Kahneman, and in our meetups, we spent a lot of time we studied his entire book. We went chapter by chapter going through the entire book. And he has a very simple concepts. We have just 2 concepts, system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the automatic capability that we have, the fast, emotional, intuitive faculty. Yes, this is much better. This is very simple. Can you expand it so we can see the social at the bottom? you have to, I think, sorry, you have to make it, sorry, smaller so that we can see social, you can see the entire diagram. Okay, perfect, perfect. Thank you, thank you. So I've simplified it since yesterday. Um, so, but what I want to, so, I was inspired by both Carl Jung and Daniel Kahneman to kind of make sense of human beings. But then I realized that what they're describing is the psychology of an individual. It's extremely valuable, but as one of my favorite authors, Jacob Branowski, puts it, man is a social solitary. We are a social being in a fundamental way, and we are a solitary being in a fundamental way. These psychological theories were focusing mostly on the individual part and not enough on the social part. So I decided that we needed to kind of think of the social part in an integral fashion with this somehow. Okay, so in that sense, it is expansion of Daniel Kahneman. But I want to approach it slightly differently. I want to go see, you can see the two axes. There is an individual and social axis. That's what we're talking about right now. But I think the fundamental axis is the evolutionary and urban axis. So Chase, is it okay if I talk about that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Now this is a huge point. This is a point about kind of the nature of, firstly about nature of evolution. For those who are not familiar with evolution and are trying to understand human beings, I think it's a hopeless quest. You can't really understand human beings without understanding evolution. So we have to understand our own evolutionary heritage, because many things that we are seeing and that are puzzling to us are rooted in our evolutionary nature. So we evolved in these African savannas, in tribes of about 30 people. So we lived with these 30 people with whom we grew up. We spent our entire life with, whom we knew really, really well. So even the slightest variation of expression, you would know exactly what it meant. And so would everybody else. And we have large brains, and our visual cortex is very powerful. Our ability to spot what is going on, especially with a human face, that we know very well, is incredible. And without any words, pre-verbally, through body language, through expressions, a lot of communication is taking place. And that is our evolutionary heritage. We operate very good as these tight knit groups with common values, what I would call family. It was tribe, we call tribe, but at that, tribes at that time are basically extended families. Everybody is related to everybody. Everybody is living together. Everybody's their life depends on their connection with the family. So it is the family, and it's kind of modern equivalent would be family and friends, close friends, and the way you feel about them and the way you know them. So that is our evolutionary heritage. We kind of evolved in these social groups. So that is one part of it. And the concomitant of that in psychology is that we have got these large brain, which responds to things, responds to patterns of things incredibly fast, with powerful emotions that are driving us to action. And if the context is fairly stable and the people that you are working with are known to you, it's a very powerful mechanism in and of itself. So the entire left half of this diagram is our evolutionary heritage. It is at the social level is the family, and at the psychological level, it is what Daniel Kahneman would call system one. It would be all the automatic uh, features. So Chase and Alex, is the kind of description of the evolutionary part clear enough?
Yeah, one of the terms that I'm highlighting in my notes, you mentioned stable context. I think from my understanding of System 1 and System 2, that's something I'm going to want to bring up later, the importance of stable versus unstable context. So we'll just plant a flag there, and let's talk about the other end of the evolutionary urban axis.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks. Um, I'm going to leave it to you to keep track of all of these points and bring them up. All right? Okay. Um, all right. So this is the evolutionary nature, what I just described. Us living with close relatives and family members for our entire life, where anybody who is a stranger is a potential danger. Um, Now, fast forward to very recent times with the advent of the first cities. That change from a hunter gatherer tribe to the first cities, it is the biggest change that human beings have ever seen. There is nothing, you talk about industrial revolution, you talk about information technology, all of those pale in comparison to what happened to human beings at that time. Okay, so that is a point that I want to focus on because that's really the heart um, of some of the largest conflicts and unsolved problems that we see in the world today, both at the individual level and at the social level. So what happened? Many, many things happened at the same time. Now, this entire field is a field of anthropology. The best thinker I've found in this field is Julian Jaynes, but there is a lot of anthropological. This is studying of how early cities developed. And several things happened at the same time. There is advent of agriculture that makes possible storage. Um, it makes possible settlements, which are dramatically different, with which you can have stuff, you can accumulate stuff which you can't do as a hunter-gatherer. There is advent of cities. Now people start living in cities of about 5,000 people, okay? That's a very dramatic change for an animal who's used to live in its own group of 30 people and who regards everybody else as an enemy to be fought with. Suddenly, you're living with 5,000 people. How do you live with strangers that you don't know? Okay. Many, many things happen at the same time to make that possible. Some of them are religion, development of organized religion, development of monuments to have kind of psychological impact, development of governments or monarchies, kings, development of writing. So there is writing, agriculture, cities, monuments, monarchies, advanced religions happening at the same time. All of them put together, their net impact is that now 5,000 people can live together without killing each other. They are able to have kind of win-win relationships. And each of these mediums make that possible. So suddenly we move from living in a group of 30 people that we have known all our lives to dealing with pretty much unlimited number of people, because once it goes above 30 or 150, it becomes just dealing with strangers. So you learn to deal with strangers. And that change, from evolutionary stage to civilization, I'm calling it urban because it focuses right squarely on the fact that it is now that people are living in cities where they are living together in larger groups than our evolutionary heritage. So that's why I call it urban, to kind of sharply distinguish it in the most clearest way. So that axis, I think, is a fundamental axis. Um, compared to that, in that sense, the individual social is a secondary axis, and I will explain. I'll be happy to explain why I think it's a secondary axis. But that's my description of what the urban life is. Um, any questions? Is this clear? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that, I mean, you say the individual and social axis is secondary, but it almost seems as if it's I mean, it's parallel in this conversation. It's not parallel in terms of your diagram, of course, but we can't help but talk about the individual and social axis as we're talking about the evolutionary and urban axis. I guess my point there is just that they're very intrinsically linked. Um, can you can you talk about the specific? I mean, on the evolutionary side, you mentioned the family context as the social evolutionary quadrant, and you also mentioned System One and Daniel Kahneman as the individual evolutionary quadrant. Can you talk about the other two quadrants, and then maybe why this is the axis of choice?
Sure. Let me go ahead and first address the point about the primary and secondary,
Sure.
why I regard evolutionary and urban as primary and individual and social as secondary. Now, this is a very deep psychological point that I've learned from mostly Julian Jaynes. Um, you kind of have to understand what an individual was like before civilization. In See, what happens is that when you have largely system one operative with very little system two, very little deliberation, you're mostly a creature. Suppose, imagine yourself as a creature of emotion, largely creature of emotion. To put it very dramatically, consider yourself to be closer to a chimpanzee rather than a human being, where chimpanzees have largely system one with very, very tiny system two, almost negligible. If that is the case, you are so immersed, your emotions are so immersed in your social experience of family and your tribe that the way in which Julian Jaynes puts it very beautifully is that in order to create an individuality, you have to kind of have a space in your head. It's a metaphor, but it's kind of like a space where you can be alone and you can do something apart from the group in which you are. And I think before, when we were our only experience was that of those 30 people, that experience of being an individual was at a much lower level. It is development of our deliberative capacity of us being able to think on our own, which really got turbocharged with writing. Again, this is Julian Jaynes' point, that the self-reflectivity, being able to see what you're doing, to be able to be aware of what you're doing, is the foundation of individuality. So in that sense, the individuality in the evolutionary context was at a much, 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 much lower level, orders of magnitude level than what is there today. Now, it is difficult for us who are enjoying, who have all of that individuality already built in, to imagine a creature who doesn't have like 100th of the self-awareness that we do. But I think that was what the case. And this is, again, this is a very deep point. So that's why I think that the evolutionary urban axis, with all of its implications, made the concept of individual stronger and separated the individual more dramatically from his social or family milieu. That separation was not as stark as we have today. So that's why I think that the individual social axis is secondary to the primary axis. I wanted to make sure that I made that point, but
Yeah.
you were asking me something about quadrants. Could you please repeat that question?
Yeah. So on the evolutionary side, we pretty explicitly defined the two quadrants. The individual evolutionary quadrant is Kahneman's system one, the intuiting unconscious mind. In the social evolutionary quadrant, you very well defined family. Family and friends, that's your tribal group, and you did a really good job of explicating what that means, what that implies, understanding pattern recognition and uh, social cues and your tribe in a very deep way. On the urban side, could we get a little more granular about those two quadrants, the individual urban quadrant and the social urban quadrant?
Absolutely, absolutely, wonderful. Great question. So now let's see. I think there is an order, just like there is an order, the order that is shown uh, in this cycle here. You know, the family is the foundation in which the system one gets created. Similarly, there is, I think, a causal relationship between the system two and the economy. So I want to start by talking about the system two. So the top right corner of individual urban, and then we will talk about this, the urban social. Okay. So what is system two? System two is our deliberative faculty. It is our rational faculty. It is our ability to think critically. It is our ability to be self-aware, self-reflective, self-corrective. It is our ability to organize things systematically. It is our ability to think beyond here and now. It is our ability to think of larger space than what we can see. It is most critically, it is our ability to think of a more longer time frame than we can immediately, than the now. Greater this capability, the more space, time, and number of people it can handle. Another way of putting it, kind of seeing, contrasting this ability is when we are operating in system one, we are influenced by people that are around us, here and now. That is the base of the entire operation of system one at a given time. But system two is this, it's basically our ability to take in a lot of information, doing that systematically, step by step, to integrate vast amount of knowledge. So that's what I would say is system two. That is um, the top right corner. So any questions, any further elaborations on that? Is that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to plant another flag in space-time. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So now let's look at the bottom right corner, and that's the function there is sustaining, and that of economy. What this kind of thinking made possible, what writing made possible, is for people to develop systems where large number of people could act together. So you had large cities which could plan, for example, granaries, where people, instead of just consuming what you hunted now before it got bad, you grew crops, you stored them in these giant granaries of ore. And when you brought your crop to the granary, the priest there will give you a tablet, a receipt. That was the first example of writing. And on those clay tablets, they marked what crop you brought in and how much of it. Then they baked it and gave it to you as a receipt. That was the first example of writing. But look at what it is doing. It is actually capturing all the work that you have done with the foresight of creating, of saying that this is a valuable product that I will work on for a long period of time to produce grain, which then I'll be able to trade in, and I can trade this receipts, which is also money, for any other product that I want, like cloth. So this is example of foresight, writing, social systems, economic systems that are making a scale of human activity, which is many, many, many fold greater than what was possible in the hunter-gatherer stage. And then from then on, the economy is simply this scaled up. So the number of people that are doing, so you have artifacts like laws and currency and language, writing, religious text, religious morality, all kinds of things that keep scaling it up in every possible dimension. So that's what I think the economy is.
So I'm going to do my best here to reflect back to you some of my interpretation of what you're saying so that you can course correct me if needed, because I think in order to have the best possible conversation about ideas like this, I want to make sure that I understand it.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned space and time as a place that I wanted to come back to. I think as I understand it, let's look at the urban end of the axis as a parallel between the system 2, which is the inside, the psychological system that is deliberate, self-reflective, and in particular can think beyond the current context in space and time and number of people. And then the social version of that, the economy, which is essentially doing the same thing. It's thinking beyond the current context, it's acting beyond the current context of space, meaning the current number of, say, resources that are at hand and available right now, beyond the current context of time, talking about labor that has previously taken place in order to bring about the current resources, as well as the understanding that in the future we may need to use stored resources, or we may need to deliberately set up some other form of labor to compensate the essential economic transactions that happen over time. And number of people, including the number of people involved in things like, I think crops and grain are a good example. The number of people involved in growing a certain number of crops versus consuming a certain amount of the products of those things. So that's the parallel that I see there in space and time, is both system 2 on the inside and the economic sustaining quadrant are both able to move out of the current context of space and time. They're able to have essentially an unstable context of space and time, versus system 1 and the evolutionary context on the social side, which would be the family. Those are products of reactivity to the current context. Do I understand that?
Oh, that's beautifully put. Beautifully put. I think so. Absolutely. I mean, that was a wonderful way of putting it. So just like in the evolutionary side, kind of there is the social part. The tribe is the social context, and what the system 1 is doing is supporting that kind of tribal action at a local level. Similarly, this is at a global level. It's the thinking, the deliberative thinking, and human action across space and time, across multiple people, thousands of people, that is being done on the urban side. So it is another very simple way of looking at it is that here are 30 people right there in front of me. This is everything that is going on this side. Here, we're talking about 8 billion people on the planet. The kind of tools that are needed to deal with these 30 people in my house, basically, or in my little village. Village is also too advanced. It is where we are moving through this geographical land because there is no settlement. That context is highly, highly local. And even the way, and you're exactly right, that what you're doing internally is you're simply reacting to people and to your environment. That's all you're essentially doing. And that is good enough. And it made us the top predator in the world. And it's an extremely successful animal. And that's all it is. Whereas on this side, on the urban side, we're looking at something with a very unlimited scale of operation along many, many, many different dimensions across all of the earth, if necessary, or more at some point. But that is the difference. So it is across. You got it exactly.
Awesome. Okay, cool. The next thing that I want to ask about is this diagram. So one of the things that I've been constantly impressed by it throughout the time that I've known you is your ability to diagram your ideas, because they come out nothing like the way that I diagram my ideas, and I throw out my diagrams. Can you talk about why you've diagrammed it in the current state? And as in the past 24 hours, you sent me maybe 3-4 versions. So I like the fact that there's this constant updating happening. What are the elements that are in the pictorial depiction of this idea?
Okay. So firstly, I would say is that, again, I'm a very visual person. I find that, our visual cortex is very large. And what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to put everything that I know together, and diagramming is the way in which I do it. So this is my way of thinking. So when I talk about writing definitely most emphatically includes diagrams. It's a way of capturing something. So yes, so all the versions that I sent you, and I sent you only a few of the versions. I sent you only 3 of them. I have like 25 of them over the last couple of days. Wow. As I'm working on these things, because I'm trying to capture everything as clearly as possible, as simply as possible. And I'm making sure that all the relationships are captured, okay? So, let me talk about the diagrams, details of the diagram. This is fascinating. Chase, you ask good questions. I really like that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, so if you look at, first one I want to talk about is, so there are the axes, right? Those are just straight lines. So those straight lines are, the fact that they are axes are captured very clearly. My earlier versions did not explicitly visually make the axis as strong as possible. And Carl was one of the persons who said, oh, you should really make that line strong, kind of running through. I just had the diagram that you put up earlier was one of the earlier versions. It had only on the side. So the fact that it kind of runs through shows that, illustrates the importance of that axis. So that's in white, that kind of stands apart from all the other colors. So those are the axes. The second thing is that it's a circle. Okay, circle is very powerful symbol of a whole. If you're trying to capture a whole, circle is a very powerful way of doing that. Okay, this I learned from Carl Jung. Okay, then you've got these 4 quadrants. Okay, I want to portray the fact that these are all related. See, so far we have talked about, I just want to make one general point. So far we have talked about the evolutionary stage and the urban stage. But the point I want to make is that though we are in the urban stage right now, we have been in the evolutionary stage for millions of years. And a lot of what we are, that evolutionary component is extremely active in us now. So that is very much integrating and interacting with the urban part of us. So the system 1 and system 2 play, there is a dance going on. There is a dance going on between the economy and the family. There is a dance going on between the economy and the intuiting or unconscious. There is a dance going on between family and deliberating. Uh, so there is this entire interaction that is going on. So I'm using the yin yang symbol. I've scaled it up to kind of 4 to capture these 4 functions. On the left-hand side, what I'm saying is that the family is the foundation, and what goes on inside the consciousness kind of proceeds from that. So that is one part of it. And the other side, what it is saying is that you really need to be thinking in a deliberate way in order to keep an economy going, to start an economy and keep it going. So there is a kind of causal relationship between on these 2 sides. There is that little dot, which is saying that, okay, this is what is going to come next. So out of the thinking will come the economy. The economy needs to sustain the family, because otherwise the whole civilization dies. So the nurturing has to, economy has to lead to nurturing. In the nurturing will intuitive capacity be nurtured too. And the intuitive capacity is going to give rise to kind of deliberating, and it's going to support the deliberating if done right. So there is all these kind of interplay between that, so that I'm trying to capture that as well. Alex, you asked me about colors before we started. Again, all of this, I'm just putting it together, but this is the best colors I have for this. The green, I think, is the color most associated with life and growth. That's why I have put it in the family. The yellow is the sign of kind of clarity of thought, which is what you're trying to achieve on deliberating and through reason. Blue is the dependable system that you create. Blue is most associated with that. And purple is a sign of kind of mystery, where you're trying to kind of pull together many things into insight. Now, I'm not saying that these colors will do, it's kind of like this is idea of Leonardo about what he calls common sense of, there is kind of commonality between how things sound and what colors that they have, and how they move, what their shapes are. So this is kind of trying to capture the right connotation where people can get a feel for it, they can speak, using the medium of color to signify the differences. So that's what I'm trying to do. And all of it is kind of, again, Leonardo's idea of excellences upon excellences, where, excellences upon excellences. What it means is that you try to if you're trying to construct something, trying to build something, you try to put as much of excellence into it as possible, as many connections, as much richness in an integrated way as possible. So that's what I'm trying to do with this, while keeping it as simple as possible, so you can grasp it at one glance, but as you observe it, you can see kind of levels of interaction that are being that are being shown.
I think there's also some Jungian synchronicity going on here. You mentioned that purple is a color of mystery and that yellow is clarity of thought. I don't know if you've ever taken a close look at the logo for the Switch podcast, but you've put our 2 colors in there in exactly a way that's meaningful for the mission of this podcast. So I think that's awesome. What about the red dot in the middle?
Okay. So first thing, I figured out these 4 colors, right? And the color that was really missing from this is red. Okay. So now if you cover the red, so red is a very good color for conflict. And what I'm trying to portray there is that there is conflict between each of this. There is conflict between system 1, system 2. There is conflict between system 2 and the family, deliberating and the family. There is conflict between the economy and the family. There is conflict between intuition, artistic intuition and economy, for example. And all of the concept. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a way of thinking about all these conflicts and trying to see kind of possible, at least being able to identify the conflicts. So a lot of the things, because like we see kind of human beings, you know, human beings just have certain, many people just have certain emotions or certain certain positions, certain ideas, and they're kind of, you know, get enraged by ideas opposed to that. This is a way of saying, okay, you can try to put the ideas in terms where you can say, okay, this is what I'm saying, and then actually hear the other person and say, oh, that's what you're saying. So you can at least see it, something like that. But to answer your question directly, the red is, it represents the conflicts between these things.
It's also definitely a good eye catch. I mean, that's, your eyes are naturally pulled to red.
Yes.
Good. One of the major points that came up when we first started studying Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow was, and you and I had a friendly argument about the best way to symbolize that. I still think that a dog and trainer is a good metaphor. However, the point of what we were talking about in that conversation is that a huge task for human beings is to offload work from system 2, the deliberate system, to system 1. I mean, that's essentially what building habits are. You are training the dog to do things without you prompting them. That's learning skills, that's building habits. And that all takes place on the individual half of this diagram. Are there parallels in the social context of this idea of offloading work or training the reactive system from the deliberate system?
That's a very good question. I don't know whether it works the same way. I think the dynamics there is going to be different.
Sure.
I mean, clearly, you know, you can see certain patterns already. Okay, and I mean, see this here. In order to kind of start out, we have to take a very long view, a very kind of large scale view. So the kind of view, the kind of observations that I'm starting out with is looking at, you know, what has happened to family as the economy has developed. And there's a very clear pattern. The biggest pattern is that as countries get richer and have bigger economy, the size of family keeps going down. Okay, now that's a very surprising thing, because you would think, you know, it's like many people would think, oh, you know, people can afford more children. No. It turns out that when they can afford more children, they have less children. Now that's very interesting, isn't it? I don't know why. I don't know why yet. Okay, but you can see the kinds of patterns. So what I'm hoping to do is that I am using this framework to kind of formulate these large observations like this to see how it goes. So to kind of come back to your question, what happens is that families, like, see, family in the modern term now, okay? Now I want to show you how, like, though these are like 4 separate colors, there are composites in it. So for example, consider your family, right? When a father is teaching his son, who's a small kid, okay, who is mostly system 1 at that point, of how to behave well with other children, so the children would want to play with them. That's something that Jordan Peterson talks about, right? So it is really getting that system 1 to kind of slowly develop system 2 so they can deal with system 3, you know, so the economy, right? So it's like And that is happening at the family level, because though, and especially people who have done successful, who have been successful at dealing with the economy, are trying to pass on not just the results of it, but the cause of it to their children, right? So they're trying to teach children what kind of, how do you need to take the responsibility? How do you need to be fair to people? These are all values that are being inculcated in the family, so that the child system two can develop a system, system one can develop a system two on the top of it that will enable them to be successful. So there are all these relationships running through this wheel.
Yeah, and my understanding of the idea of games is that that comes from Piaget. When Jordan Peterson talks about it, he talks about the Piagetian game of life, essentially, where every interaction you have with the world around you can be thought of as a game, meaning that it's got a set of rules, it's got players, it's got outcomes. And the goal in life isn't to win all the games, it's to play the games such that you get to play more, you get to come back, and almost like thinking about, instead of winning specific battles, you're interested in winning the war. And sometimes that means giving up ground. Sometimes that means tactical withdrawal. I like the military metaphors because they make sense to me. I think I actually do see that in the economy as well. So going back to Piaget, he also talks about developmental stages, where when children are first developing their social contexts, they are able to actually play the games before they can describe them. The games come up as system one interactions before they can become system two interactions. And I think in that way, I see that parallel between the family and the economy. When you're in a family, you're learning the social context. You're learning the small tribe social context. You're learning how to play those Piagetian games with your immediate family, your immediate interactions. But the reason that you're learning a lot of that isn't only translating to your immediate context. It has to, just like the social games translate to the larger social context, it has to translate to the economic context as well. When you go and you participate in the economy, if you go into the economy with the idea of every single interaction I have, I'm going to dominate and win, you burn out really quickly. And except for a very few, I don't think that's the best way to play the game. The best way to play the game economically is to get more people to want to make economic interactions with you. That's what starting a business is. That's what marketing is. We talked with Sean Croxton about the Happy Meal mistake, and I'm not going to go into that. Let's just say that fits into this. If you want to look up the Happy Meal mistake,
Mm-hmm.
It's a good story.
Let me add one more thing here. You can look at this wheel going around the wheel as generations. So, you start out in a family, you're born in a family, you develop your system one. That's the initial kind of system that develops internally, in a young child. And that initial growth of this tremendous expansion of the size of the brain is mostly expansion of system one. At some point, they learn to get a deliberate control and direction over their own mind, their own thinking. And eventually that enables them to become productive members of the economy and have more children going back into the green circle. So this is basically just the entire life cycle of people.
Do you see any parallels in the hero's journey?
Describe to me hero journey.
Well, okay,
I have not, and then I'll show you how it maps.
Sure. So Joseph Campbell, comparative mythologist, came up with this idea that across cultures, cultures consider certain behavior heroic. They describe in their hero myths certain patterns of behavior that seem to be intrinsic, that seem to just stand out to us as human beings, because you see cultures that essentially had no contact with each other with very, very similar patterned stories. So the very basic hero's journey goes like this. You're in your context, you're in your walled city. For some reason, something goes wrong. There's this call to adventure, this call to chaos. It could be positive, it could be negative. For heroes, it varies, but it's essentially a call to adventure. And some heroes have some resistance to it, some dive right in, but it requires you to leave the walled city, to go out beyond what you know into the unknown, to go from safety into potential danger. And in that, once you've crossed the threshold of adventure, you take on a series of trials that, while grueling, essentially force you to grow. And at the end of this series of trials, there's the ultimate boon. There's the thing that you were after that has the potential to bring things back into order if the hero applies the appropriate actions. Sometimes that's finding the gold, saving the girl, whatever it is. And at the end of the journey, it's this big circle that, like yours, I think goes clockwise. You return to the walled city with an improvement, with the gold, with something that can uplift your previous context into something new. So that's the basics of it.
Okay. Okay. So the way in which I would map this is that this one really maps through the center dot. Okay. You can see like whether you're looking, kind of intuiting what is possible in the economy. So it is like going across, or saying, so basically just going, it's like, see, if you look at this figure, right, where is the conflict? The conflict is right in the middle. So it's a way of facing the conflict and resolving the conflict to produce a greater level. So imagine if the circle was covered almost 90% of this. That's where you start. And by hero's journey in that sense is kind of pushing the circle to making it smaller. So bringing more of that conflict into a natural moving part. So you're kind of increasing the economy, increasing your intuitive ability, increasing your deliberative ability, also increasing your nurturing ability. If you are just satisfied where you are remaining at the edge of this circle. Chase, this is a really bad interface. I want to just use my finger to change the diagram to show you how to do it. So let me just try to pantomime here. Imagine the circle covering about 80% of the whole thing, the red circle. That's where you're starting out. What you're doing in the hero's journey is that you're saying, yes, this is where the chaos is. So I'm going to push, and you'll basically go around to create kind of take out about 10% of the circle, chaos circle, to make it kind of closer so that the conflict becomes less. I prefer the growth in this direction because it is like kind of achieving the wholeness. It is kind of removing the conflicts that you see in yourself. So that's where I would put it. It's kind of reduction of that red circle is what you're after in the hero's journey. You have the courage to see the conflicts and work to eliminate them so that more and more of it is flowing beautifully all the way around through all these systems.
Oh, interesting. I love this. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned at the beginning that your goal for this is that you can use this common vocabulary to contextualize questions about human beings. What kind of questions are you, or how is that, how do you imagine that aspect of this? What does that mean to use this to contextualize questions?
Yes, I mean, what I want to do is, um, I want to make it possible for people to talk to each other, regardless of their views, regardless of their expertise. So, for example, um, the scientists are mostly operative in that deliberative area. That's where they are the strongest. Whereas most artists are strongest in the intuiting area. And I think a lot can be gotten by them talking to each other. So that's kind of one way of looking at it. If there are, for example, there are many kind of like fiscal conservatives and liberals. The On any particular issue, the fiscal conservative immediately tries to maximize the blue, the economy, and the liberal automatically focuses on nurturing. So seeing that these two things are there enables them to at least say, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing, and we understand that there is a conflict in that. And there may be some way of kind of finding a middle ground or something like that. So I think it allows for, I give you one example from the top, from the individual side of operation, one example from the social side. So this is some of the ways in which at least people can communicate with each other of where they stand. And I think I've tried to keep the vocabulary as simple as possible, so that people can say, oh, we can talk to each other. I'm sure that everybody will have their own point about how each of these things work, or how the interaction works, or what is more important than the others. But at least they will have a common base to talk about. That's what I'm hoping for. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to try to run as many things through it, just like you did a fantastic example of Hero's Journey. Okay, I'm familiar with it, but it was not there in front of me. And I was able to kind of hear that and say, okay, this is how it maps onto it. So what it does is that what I'm hoping to do is that, just like, science versus art or liberal versus conservative, I want to kind of go ahead and do that for as many issues. And I'm counting on it. This is what I love about these meetups, they're amazingly thoughtful people. And I'm counting on them to kind of bring up all kinds of examples, and be able to deal with all of them.
One thing that I was thinking about as you were explaining this, and kind of the process of urbanization and creating a society, was how I grew up in a very rural part of the country, well, upstate New York, and it seems like it's much more heavily weighted on the left side of this diagram. The lives are much more about nurturing and intuitive, farmers teaching their kids how to farm and so on and so forth. And it's a very intuitive thing. And then when I moved to, for example, New York City, there is much more, deliberative effort on the right side of this. And it's interesting to kind of see how these are helpful for problem solving in different aspects. There's some things that it seemed that the country people just kind of knew and figured out, and then vice versa. So I think this is very interesting.
No, absolutely. That's a brilliant example, Alex. I think there has been always a tension between farmers and traders. So traders are in the cities. Farmers are in rural areas. They're farming. They're closer to nature. They're closer to they're even the social systems are families. It may not be a tribe, but the little town, little village that you grew up in, where you knew everybody, is very similar. And there is the kind of the interaction that is there between people is premised on the fact that, what, this is a person I'm dealing with all the time. I may like some things about them, dislike some things, but I deal with them. And so the kind of attitude you have is very different. Traders are completely different. And there's always been, throughout history, has been a tension, because farmers have never understood traders. Because they are saying, what are you doing? You're not making anything. Okay, and so there is a lot of animosity towards traders. Cultures like the Jewish culture, for example. One of the reasons that there is animosity is that there is trading that they do. And most of the cultures are rooted in the farming cultures, and they do not understand what trading is. So it is the same conflict between rural and urban. That's the modern version of this wheel. That's a brilliant observation.
And also the birth rate correlates with that too, as you explained. There's higher birth rate. I just double checked that to make sure. But in rural America, it's a higher birth rate than in urban. So that makes sense.
Exactly. And but isn't it fascinating that it's like, those people who can afford to have children have less children. And why is that? So, I mean, it goes again very close to it. Like if you think on the left side, you are likely to be more rural, you are likely to be in time-wise, it would be people further back out in time are more likely to be on the left-hand side. People in kind of larger cities are likely to be on the right-hand side. So it's really so many different levels of observations.
I'm still mulling on the politics side of this. I think I would really like to have a deeper understanding of how this can contextualize political values.
Sure.
Because, as you said, you mentioned sort of the focus on economy versus focus on nurturing family. But I don't, in my mind, that's not capturing the full question.
Absolutely. I mean, the way I would like to do this, Chase, is that I want to make this, I'm thinking of this as a kind of a foundation for understanding large scale problems. So like with politics, I will start with kind of the history of politics of saying, okay, why is it, for example, monarchy was the default system throughout history? Like, for example, when you look at a politics at a grand level, right? Throughout most of the history, most of the Western conversation, when I studied the great books, almost everybody agrees that a benevolent monarch is the best system of government. And that's mostly like a scaled up version of a family with a family head. So that is very much on the left side of the entire discipline. Founding fathers are a dramatic departure from it, where this is during the Enlightenment time. This is after the scientific revolution, where that yellow part has begun to shine. The deliberative faculty has become very clear to people. And they are the first ones who put together the idea of government of laws, not of people. So this is a kind of connection that you needed the Enlightenment in order to come up with the idea behind America or idea behind rights as separate from benevolence of a leader, which is very much on the left side. So what I want to do is that I want to start looking at politics at this scale first, because it's very easy to get kind of drawn into the current conflicts. And so I will come to it, but there is a lot more. I want to do the kind of larger patterns first, and then come back to the present.
Yeah, I just looked up really quick the Jonathan Haidt moral matrix analysis of sort of liberals versus conservatives in their endorsement of various moral foundations. And I think that for future study of how this goes with political leanings, I think that may be an interesting place for you to start and build an understanding of the implications there. I don't know how much more you want to talk about that now.
Yeah, no. I mean, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take every idea that I have ever studied from every thinker, and I'm going to put it against this. So Jonathan Haidt for sure,
Yeah.
Daniel Kahneman, and just basically everybody. And then try to map it and try to see. And as I go along, I'm sure I'm going to tinker with this and to build it up. Go ahead.
Okay. We've exhausted most of the major questions that I have. Do you want to? Well, first, can you just give a quick sort of summary of the thinkers that you've integrated so far? I know you mentioned Julian Jaynes, Kahneman, Carl Jung. I want a jumping off point for my own further studying. Are there any others that you would include in that list?
I would keep currently, I think, Jung. So Jung, Kahneman, and Jaynes are the biggest, biggest ones. Plus, there is the kind of entire field of evolutionary biology, which is crucial for studying the left side of that. So that has been very big. And then some basic economics to study the lower right corner. And then scientific method to look at the upper right corner. And then all kinds of creative theories to look at the upper left corner. So it's like, but those are fields.
Yeah.
And I'm mostly thinking in terms of fields.
Okay.
So this is a way of kind of bringing different fields together and showing their relationships to each other.
Okay.
So yeah, that's good. Do you want
Great.
to go to questions?
Yeah. So before we do that, Alex, do you want to jump in? You have any other questions that you want to hit?
Yeah. Is there an example we could run through?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, an applied kind of idea to this, just to kind of see it,
Sure.
like methodology.
Sure. So how about, one of the questions that when we're talking about this, Chase had proposed leadership. How does it apply to leadership? Do you want to take that?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm interested in that. Do you have an answer right off the bat, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does it apply to leadership?
So it's like, it's pretty smart, because after you asked about it, I thought about it for a few minutes. So let's take a leader of a business. Okay. So what are they doing? Right? They're trying to actually add to the economy. But in order to do that, they have to have formulated a vision and how to do it. So there is a lot of deliberating going on, and their aim is to change the economy, to build the business. So the goals are on this side. But in order to be a good leader, they have to actually nurture all the skills that their employees have. They have to motivate them. So they have to engage the intuiting. They have to, everybody under them, everybody whom they are working with, should feel that they are they are basically doing this for me. They are on my side, and they have to be inspired enough. So they have to have some they have to bring that feeling of nurturing into the team. And they have to do it in a way where all their team members are comfortable exercising their intuition and deliberation so the internal individual part should be, everybody should be free to exercise that without any fear that, okay, this person is going to stomp me down because they disagree with me. So they have to provide the direction, but so they have to achieve the right-hand side, the deliberating and sustaining, while encouraging the other two sides at the same time. So they have to be operative at all these 4 levels to be a great leader.
Excellent. Do you have another example that you have already thought about that we haven't touched on yet?
No. I'm
Okay.
just taking the examples that people throw at me.
Great.
So I'll rather take questions. And your example of hero's journey was great. Alex's example of rural versus urban was great. This
Cool.
one is great. So just whatever.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Q&A. Let me pull up the chat. It's different when you're screen sharing.
Oh no, you can stop the screen sharing if you want.
Yeah, let me stop screen sharing, and then if anybody needs the diagram again,
we can just flash it up. Yeah.
Yeah, we can bring it back up. All right, so for anybody who has never done Q&A here before, just a quick reminder, we have a couple of rules. Please keep things brief, on topic, and courteous. The way that we will take questions, if people have raised their hand in the participants window or have asked a question in the chat or put an exclamation in the chat, we will go ahead and call on you in order. It looks like we've got a whole lot. The first hand I see raised is Laura Shapiro. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Once again, please keep your question brief and on topic. And we also don't do follow-up questions until the entire list of questions is exhausted. So Laura, you are up.
Just a second, I have to allow them to unmute themselves.
Okay. Not all questions. The first thing, in terms of less children for rich people, you know, they tend to work at higher level positions where they're working a lot and they don't actually have, you know, time to devote to more children. That have some impact. Second thing I wanted to say about the diagram. I, as a math person, look at that diagram and see all those little circles as intersection points within each of those. And I look at the red circle as an intersection of all of those, not as a point as you talked about. And it could be that they all intersect because if green intersects with purple and purple intersects with yellow, then, you know, purple and yellow, they, you know, have them. So I think that that circle goes around, but it's odd to have those kinds of different kinds of axes or sectors. I don't necessarily, I see them creating sectors more than axes because
Laura,
again.
do you have a question for Shrikant?
Yeah, well, no, well, the question is, you know, do you have established like your global statement about what this is all about, what the project is all about, in a clear statement of intent? Because, you know, to make it sort of more transparent to people like me who are coming into it, that I would understand this and the vocabulary, that you know, you have all that. Okay.
Sure. So I've been doing these meetups for about 4 years. And what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to make communication on human issues easier. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to kind of come up with a vocabulary or kind of a system for classifying questions, to identify issues, and have like I found that developing a common vocabulary enables us to talk to each other. We went through the book on Daniel Kahneman, we went through the book on Jordan Peterson, and both of those I found was critical to develop. It was not only about the book, it allowed all of us, we were like a community of maybe about 300 people here, out of which maybe 50 or 60 people would show up every Saturday to discuss this. To develop a common vocabulary is a huge deal, because then you can keep identifying issues, connecting issues. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to develop a simple way of talking about human beings.
Excellent. Next up is Joseph.
I just had I've actually a few questions, but I'll just be really quickly. I'll try and pick the one that if I were to draw this out in a table, is there a way to capture this in a contextual way and then the principles that you're espousing, so that you would have maybe those are systems 0, 1, 2, and 3 as principles, and then on a contextual way you can have on the right side and left side the individual and social, and the evolutionary and urban. And so I'm just trying to draw this out, so where if I were to create a node within that framework, that is that a different way of looking at? Is that possible?
It's very intriguing. Joe, can you send this to me? Can you email this to me?
Yeah, I
What
mean,
you're thinking of, and we'll go back and forth
yeah,
on this
so
one. Because
yeah,
what I'm doing is, see, the way in which I work on diagrams is to say each diagram is kind of designed to capture certain kinds of relationships. There are many equivalent ways of capturing the same thing, some of which have, you know, if you put it in a certain way, it allows you to do certain things better. And I'm all for exploring like maybe 10 different ways of doing
okay,
it. So I would love to see what you're thinking of, and
okay,
we'll go back and forth.
okay, yeah. So that,
Thanks.
thank you. Yeah, I was
Mhm.
just trying to capture the contextual part. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Awesome. Next up is Carl.
Yeah, thank you. I think you answered the questions that I had. I was still confused about the little red dots, circles within, and I think you mentioned yin and yang. Is that it?
I see that as being kind of the place where all of them touch each other. So there is a conflict between them. So red dot to me actually represents the conflict, because
Oh no, I'm
there
not
is.
talking about the red dot. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the little circles. That
Oh, little circle. Yeah, that's the yin yang thing. That
Oh,
okay, from the idea that the seed of the next level, you
Is
know,
in-
the next stage lies in the previous stage,
Got it.
and from there it's going to you know, grow as a full thing, and that's going to give rise to something else.
And then my second part of the question was, why do the colors bleed into the next quadrant?
The part of it is that if it's a curved line, the straight line will have necessarily make it to be so that the colors bleed over. I want to keep it. I want it to be like the yin yang diagram, which shows kind of the movement, as opposed to the diagram that you proposed to me. That was much that is like you had like different quadrants. It doesn't fully capture the movement. So one of the things that I'm putting that is that you flow from one thing to another, and you need to be kind of working on all of these four things in order to be effective. So that is what I'm trying to capture by showing the movement in addition to the axis.
Excellent. Next up is Leslie.
Hi, thanks. I was thinking about how each civilization or humans have spent less time in each subsequent quadrant, probably, and that most of our time, most of our evolution was in maybe the earliest quadrant, and in the 5,000 years since civilization came to be, that's not enough time for our species to evolve. And the two of you were discussing the idea that the family quadrant is reactive, and I think it's that reactive nature that was built into us through millions of years of evolution that we have not been able to undo in 5,000 years. And so it is our undoing. What do you think?
That's very, very interesting. It's absolutely true that this is an accelerating you know, system. The older, I mean, the family thing is as old as mammalians. So it's like it's even kind of predating you know, human beings, even predating primates. And then each of the other systems has developed for a shorter and shorter time. The other thing, other way of looking at it, you can look at all of this is like a pyramid. So in a very real sense, we carry our evolutionary heritage in us, and we need to leverage it fully. So for example, healthier you are physically, it's going to flow through everything that you do. There is a so it's kind of like elephant and the rider kind of a metaphor. Elephant is important. Rider is setting the direction, but the elephant is important. So it's really important to kind of make sure that the older parts of us continue to thrive when we are thriving in the later parts.
Awesome. Next up is Kaiten. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yes, Katten. But first of all, it took a little bit while, maybe 1 hour for me to understand the purpose with your diagram. But then I think once you gave some examples, and I can see how it works. And then I got excited. But anyway, so I think um, my question is, maybe if you have another example that you haven't thought of, or you've already thought of, about, let's say, cross-cultural. I think that if you go bigger from the, I guess that goes into the urban side. You have countries, and then across countries, and let's say across races. How would you kind of address, like, the way you talked about, let's say, the conservatives and the Democrats using the diagram? How would you
Sure,
kind of?
sure. So let's take cross-cultural issues, okay? And again, what I'm going to try to do always is that I'm going to try to take the biggest examples, kind of larger scale examples. So if we can make it work for larger scale examples, then then it'll be easier, and that it will be possible to deal with kind of a whole range of things. So I'm deliberately, just like when Chase asked me questions about Republicans and Democrats, I went to monarchy and founding fathers. I'm going to do the same thing. So if you look at the largest cross-cultural things, what is it? There are basically three large cultures that have been developed over a long period of time. And that is India, China, and the West. All three are about the same size in terms of the number of people, and they have developed quite independent of each other. And so let's look at these three cultures on this diagram. Chase, can you put up the diagram?
Yep, one sec.
So, so if you look at, first thing I want to say is that of all the cultures, the idea that you need to flow from opposites and that there is a dance of opposites, that is captured far more in the Chinese culture. So this idea of flow between different kinds of systems, that China gets. The Chinese way of thinking gets far better than the West or India. The Indian culture, if you look at its strengths, the core idea, the most powerful idea of Indian culture is that of Indian culture has been focused on consciousness, and specifically about directing consciousness, for loosely translated as concentration. So it is all about deliberating. That's what it has been focused on. The West has been heavily focused on transforming of the world, and the Industrial Revolution came from here. So the blue is the West. So at a very large level, these are the strengths. The nurturing is there everywhere. Let's take, so for example, more primitive cultures who have much more of that than all these three cultures. But so that's my quick answer at kind of the kind of thinking that you can, kind of the ways in which you can apply cross-cultural things.
And I think to add on to that, I saw in the chat a little bit more about the question. I think the reason that this kind of analysis is important for something like cross-cultural interaction is because if you're looking at a specific cross-cultural conflict in these terms, it actually gives you a better understanding, not only of the origin of the conflict, but how to move through it, because you can understand a bit more of the operative functions, the values that are at play, and you've pretty much all of us have had the experience of having some sort of interpersonal conflict and talking past one another. Well, that absolutely happens on a cultural scale because we don't have understandings at this level as a mainstay of the tools that are used for solving cross-cultural conflict. So that's my understanding of the implications. All right. I think we are, yeah, we're out of the bulk of the questions. I would love to go into the main discussion portion of this. We'll go ahead and end the main podcast. Shrikant, if people are interested in following up on this idea, as always, where can they find out more as you develop it?
All you have to do is to search for 52 Living Ideas, the number 52 Living Ideas. You can go 52livingideas.com. That's our website. From there, you can go ahead and attend meetups. We do meetups every day on various topics of psychology and philosophy and personal growth. You can see the YouTube videos. There is a 52 Living Ideas YouTube channel. There is a mailing list, which is a weekly mailing list. So please join that. And there is a blog on the website where I post all the discussions. I'll start posting, highlights of the chat, and you can go ahead and discuss these ideas over there. So 52livingideas.com.
Excellent. Well, Shrikant, thanks for coming on today and having this discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Chase and Alex. It's always a delight talking to you.